Alright folks, a week or two ago I posted this lighting turntable of a cloud I was working on onto YouTube, and a lot of y'all asked for tutorials, and it's like, whoa, I haven't seen this before. So I'm finally following up on that. Well, not finally, it's only been a week or two. But this is actually a very simple technique that has seemingly gone unnoticed by most of the YouTubers in the Blender space. Well, not just YouTubers, most of everybody, or at least it hasn't been published into a video just yet. So a lot of y'all like this, so hopefully this video gains some traction, and let's get started by first gathering some reference. Alright folks, so let's start by looking at some reference images. These are just gathered from Google. So we want to isolate the aspects of the shader that we want to replicate and the aspects that we want to avoid. So let's start with what we want to see in our cloud render. So the first thing is that these clouds have zero ambient occlusion. So it's very like almost a solid color, and they almost have reverse ambient occlusion, right? You see they're actually quite lighter in the center than they are in the outside. And this isn't usually replicated in 3D. It is possible, but you need as many light steps as you can get, and those are very, light bounces. Those are very hard to do for your computer. You can pretty easily set your computer to render them by just changing the slider up to like 1,000 for volume bounces, but your computer isn't going to like that. So here's another example. It's a very soft background. It's a very soft color. Here's another one. And another thing we want to get is we want to get these dark edges, these silver edges or silver linings, as I've heard people refer to them as. This is something that CG clouds, not many people really can get, which is crazy because it's actually like one of the simplest things to do. It'll just naturally rise out of the just having more volume balances. You don't even need to mess with anisotropy or anything. You want to make sure that the AO stuff holds up for all densities. We can see that it's soft over here where it's less dense. It's also very soft over here where it's a lot more dense. And here's a good depiction of how that like reverse AO works. It's like lighter in the center, which is really cool. So let's go into Blender and let's sort of show what is usually done for clouds, was like considered good CG clouds, or at least mediocre, at least in the Blender community. So let's go. So here over in the renders tab, this is 256 samples with the shader being just this. It's a volume. I'm going to show you where to get this cloud VDB, by the way. This attribute for the density connected to the volume scatter with high anisotropy. So let's sort of see what this looks like when you're in the viewport. It's very noisy, but you do get some good things, which is like on the back you can see, actually you can't really even see it here. You have to tone down the density a little bit to see it. Well, you can kind of see it once it resolves a bit. It's very bright around the edges, which is physically accurate, but unfortunately we see all of these dark spots in there. This isn't a very good cloud. It's also pretty dark. So let's see what a render with 256 samples on this looks like. So we can see this took 3 minutes on my machine. I have a pretty high-end machine, so it might take a little bit more for you guys, but it's pretty rough. You get some nice things, like you can see sort of the silver linings starting to appear up here, right? It actually isn't too bad. You can maybe brighten it up. Clouds are pretty bright, and usually Blender's color space doesn't really deal with skies and stuff very well, so you kind of have to fiddle with these, but Filmic is alright. You can sort of see that we're getting some cool stuff there, but still this isn't a great cloud. So let me show you the shader we're going to make today. So there's the same number of samples. It took a little bit longer, but look at this. This is much better. So we are getting nice silver linings. It's a lot less noisy. Look, you can literally just apply denoise to this and it'll be perfectly fine. We're getting crisp edges, and it's not for much more render time. Like, it's only a minute more out of a 4-minute render, and you really could just lower the samples or lower the noise threshold and just go with it, you know, to get the same render time. So this is what I'm going to show you how to create today. I need to give some credit first to some people on my Discord who did a great job at figuring out some of the essential pieces to this mystery. And also some credit to myself, because I did come up with some of these techniques. But yeah, let's get started, eh? So here, let me just show you straight out of the viewport what's going on. So this is our old volume scattering setup, and this is the new one. Oops, we gotta set this to the volume. It's much better. It's also a tad bit slower. So let's go to render settings first, because this is arguably the most important thing. So first of all, we're going to be using VDBs. This works for procedurals, but I'm not going to cover that today, and if you can follow this, you can probably convert it to procedurals. Essentially, you just need to make this attribute here, this geometry, or sorry, this density attribute, you just need to turn this into some procedural texture and it'll work just fine. Everything else can stay the same. So let's do render settings, then I will show you where to find this cloud map, and then we can start constructing the shader, eh? So we're going to start with the light paths. So we need to have a total of 32 bounces with 32 on the volume. The rest of these can stay the same, right? If you have 0 volume bounces, it's going to be a sad shader, right? It'll render fast, but it's not going to look very great. But if you have 32, we get all that nice in scattering, at the cost of a bit less or a bit more time per sample, right? So that's that. Now if you're using if you're using VDBs, you can set, depending on the VDB, you can set your render rate to, or step rate, sorry, to anywhere between like 1 and 10. Don't ever go below 1 with VDBs, because it's already normalized to be roughly 1 step per voxel, so you aren't going to get any more data out of it unless you are altering with procedurals. So that's just my quick that's my sort of rule. I have this exposure set down, but I mean, you can really do whatever you want with it. Let's look around the shader though, just to sort of see what you're getting. So you're going to get a lot of these really nice dark edges, and it will still give you those lovely silver lines that let it render out for a second. And if you change the density, so if I'm going to add a math and multiply it by like 0.5, you can see that a little bit more clearly. You can also see we get that reverse like AO. Like, this is, by the way, we can change this up a lot, but we're not going to get any AO. And I'll tell you why that is after we construct the shader. Most people here are for the shader, not for the rendering techniques, but for those who are, I think you'll find this fascinating. So yeah, let's get to where to find this volume. So if you search up WDAS Cloud Download, that stands for Walt Disney Animation Studios, go to Clouds, this first one. It might not be the first for you, but just this link should be disneyanimation.com/resources/clouds. They have other resources as well. They're worth checking out because they all are pretty high quality. I'll put the link to this in the description if you don't want to search it up. But you click this download, and then it'll give you a couple VDBs. One will be full res, you don't need that. And then it'll go down to 16th res, which is a little bit low res for us. I am using the half res one. I added this little one because this is a duplicate, but yeah. So let's start constructing the shader. So the first thing you need to do is you need to import your volume. So that's, you can Shift A, add, where is it, volume, import open VDB, select the half res one, and it'll append that into your scene. and then create a new material for it. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add in this attribute node. So let's input attribute. By the way, the default material will come with a principled volume. You want to delete that. You want to instead use a scattering. So there you go. Actually, I'm sorry, do not put this into the color. Put this into the density. Set this to 1. And the attribute's name is density, lowercase d. So this is going to capture the density attribute of your volume. So if I select this volume and I go under this tab with this little cloud thing, you can see the attributes. So that's under the grid. This is the density, and it's a float, right? There are other types of attributes, but this is the one that we want because it's going to give us the density. If we don't use the density and we just plug this in, give it a minute, we're going to get this sort of cubey sort of thing, right? But with the density, yeah. So anyways, this is what the cloud looks like, just with a basic volume scattering. This is a bit too dense. We can see some of the AO going, but it is nice and noiseless. Not noiseless, what am I saying? It's not as noisy, but it also has plenty of its own issues, namely being it doesn't diffract light like clouds do. So let's first start by changing the so-called phase function, which is how it diffracts light. Basically, that's just anisotropy. But so what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this. I'm going to combine those together. And I'm going to change one of these to 0.9. And one of these to 0.5. So in this shader, I'm essentially doing the same thing, except for the anisotropy, I'm multiplying one of them by 0.5, and the other one is just getting the straight output from this. So, and then we're going to use a converter, math. We can either use a mix shader or an add shader. I personally like the add shader because it won't split your rays. But you do have to, if you want to get a mixed value, you have to use math and then multiply by 0.5. So that's going to give you a phase function that won't be as noisy as just using a regular volume scatter with 0.9. And that makes it a lot weirdly less dense. Like this is a lot better, and you still get that these sort of bright linings around the sun, or around where the sun is when you're looking at it. So that's good. So the next thing we want to do is we have this principle that we understand from looking at these reference images, that no light is absorbed in these clouds, aka there is no AO. So how do you deal with that? So if we go back into Blender, we can use something called the light path node, right here. And then there's a specific output, which is the ray depth. And this is going to show how many light bounces we can go, or how many light bounces the ray has already undergone. So essentially what we do in this light bounces tab, or this light paths tab, is you give this max bounces, right? So it's going to try to do 32 volume bounces, and then it's just going to kill the ray. And that doesn't matter if the ray is inside the volume or outside the volume, it's just going to end the ray. So, but when we do that, we return a blank black value. So that gives us this AO, right? So what we can do instead is we can say at or at volume sample or bounce 32, completely kill the volume so that it returns whatever is outside. It just returns this world texture. But we have to be a little bit more delicate with that than just completely killing it. So what I do in here is I'm using a map range from min to max, and I'm setting that to be from 1 to 0, right? And then I'm going to multiply that by this by this density. So I'm going to set another multiply, and then I'm going to get this math node, and then ray depth. Actually, sorry, not math, map range. Where is it? I never use map range, but it is the most efficient way to do it. So this is going to go into the first value, and then from min to max. So we have 32 volume bounces. This max number should not be any more than 32, or else you're going to start to get AO. But you can set it to be less, and that won't really do anything except it'll kill some more of the volume bounces. So I'm going to set this to 32. At that point, you might as well just remove or lower this down to whatever you set it to. That's this quality right here. So we're mapping it linearly from 0 to 32, and we gotta set this to 1 and to 0. And we're gonna immediately see, if we let it render out a little bit, we just killed all of the AO, right? Just by that one simple trick. That's pretty incredible if you ask me. But we've still got a few more tricks to play. This is already a spanking good cloud, right? Let's let it render out a little bit. So by this one trick, we've increased the realism like 100%, like 90%. And we've also killed a lot of the noise. And you can see, I'm not going to wait for the whole thing, but we got these silver linings as well, right? And you could really stop here and it's perfectly fine. These 3 nodes will do all the work for you. But if you want to keep going and you want to add a little bit more realism, you'll notice that if we just take this volume scatter and let it resolve for a little bit, it appears a lot less dense, even if we increase the density a lot. Like it's significantly, because the light in the anisotropy penetrates a lot further into the cloud because it doesn't diffract as much. It appears less dense, right? Compared to this. So what we can do is we can say, all right, we have this nice volume detail around the edges. We don't really want to sacrifice that. What we can do instead is we can add another multiply and take this shadow ray, which is essentially going to be how much light reaches a certain point in this volume, and then multiply that. I'm going to use a mix node. I am in 3.4, which has these fancy mix nodes. I'm going to multiply that by 1 if it's not a shadow ray, and another value like 0.5 or something if it is a shadow ray. So I'm going to plug that into the factor. I'm going to set this to something like 0.5. You can see that also made it a little bit brighter. So this is the shadow density input on this. You can see that it's actually doing pretty much the same thing. The shadow density goes to this multiply node, and it's mixing between factor A, which is this, which we don't actually need, and factor B, which is this multiplied by the shadow density. And we're essentially doing the same thing, except we're instead of we're just switching around these nodes a little bit, right? So that is more or less it, really. There's not a whole lot more that can be done here. There's a little bit more in this shader, but it's actually very simple, right? So I'm going to combine this into a group. I'm going to keep this let's see. I'm going to combine all of this. This value is going to become our density. And then we're going to want a quality. That is going to be in here. Set that to 32. And then we will need an anisotropy value. So one of these, as I said before, is going to be multiplied by 0.5. And if we set that to 0.9, it looks good. I'm gonna call this Cloud Shader Tutorial. Sweet. And now let's add in this final one, which is going to be called Shadow Density. And if we want to take this to the extreme, we could set this like 5, right? Which would make it look extremely dense, as you can see. It also kills a lot of the brightness, because obviously a lot of the light is sort of being absorbed. If we set this like 0, we can see there is 0 shadowing at all. And this is a cool way to see where the silver lining and silver edges occur. As you can see, as it resolves, you can see some of these parts, especially around the outside, are a little bit darker than others. And we can turn that down. You can see really how far this effect goes. But you can turn it up. And let's look at an example of like a really dense cloud. So if we had a math node and then multiply this by like 5. You can see it's a little bit harder for the shader to resolve the details. That's mainly because we need a little bit more steps, so we can turn this down to like 2. So it might take a little bit longer, but it's not going to be as hard. As hard for the computer to compute it. And let's let it resolve. And we can see we still get 0 AO. Like this backside is very soft. And then if we take the density down and let it resolve, this will take a little bit longer because it needs to go through more volume steps. So we can probably, and since the detail is less prevalent, we can set to like 10 and that'll render it faster. You can see this is like a good example of a very soft, less dense cloud. And we still get that nice, these volume edges that are very, very nice. I like to just keep the volume density as it was in the VDB because it works best. And yeah, that's more or less everything about the shader. It's actually an incredibly simple trick. Like, this is all that there is. And also, good to note, it does work with other colors. So if we set this like blue, it'll take obviously a little bit longer because the noise is a little bit different. Or it won't take longer really, it'll just be a little bit more noisy. And that's pretty fun. So if you want to experiment with like smoke and stuff, you can pretty easily do that. But oh well, so that's it. So I want to take some time to briefly plug a product of mine that's going to come out in the next few days. And also the Discord server for competitions and such. So I have made a nice nebula shader. This is the wrong HDRI. Let me go to this one. So I made a nebula shader and I am going to be selling that on Gumroad and maybe on Patreon, probably on Patreon. Also with some HDRIs, and you can see these are the quality of it. These are 16K, HDR, all that fun stuff. I am rendering out some others not as we speak, but pretty soon I will be. And you see there's some neat stuff where every volume or every star emits light around its surroundings. You see that. So yeah, if you're interested, keep your eyes peeled in the next few days while I get it ready to be shipped out and sold. Check the Patreon. I will have this cloud shader, even though it's very simple to construct, it will be on there. So yeah, on the Discord server we're hosting some contests and artist interviews and Q&As and all that fun stuff. We are currently working towards 2,000 members, which is crazy. So yeah, if you want a bit of that fun, please do join. And yeah, I'm going to sign off. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I will see y'all later.